My name's Ed Bruno. Years ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was the director of organization of the UE. After that, I was a national organizer for the Labor Party with a fellow by the name of Tony Mazzocchi. And after that, I was the national organizing coordinator for what became the National Nurses Organizing Committee, NNU, which I'm happy to say organized the first RN hospital workers union, hospital nurse union in Texas, North Carolina, Louisiana, Arizona. So I only raise that partly because I'm happy about it, and partly to tell you that sometimes strategies work. One of the problems we have is, this is a snappy slogan, right? Organize us out. Anybody disagree with this slogan? This is a hell of a slogan, right? The problem is when you go to the back side of the shirt, there's nothing there. So you say, okay, organize the South. Right? So then what? What this session is about is the then what. And we don't pretend in the SWA that we have a lot of answers. What we are saying, however, is you have to have a strategy. And the strategy ought to be based on a couple of things. First of all, history. How was it done before? Secondly, what's our conditions that we're looking at today? Because obviously history doesn't just simply repeat itself. What did somebody say? It doesn't repeat itself, but sometimes it rhymes. There's certain things you can learn from history, but there's many, many parallels that you just simply don't exist anymore. Then you can't rely on what happened before. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the thing that we just simply can't avoid, which are labor board elections, particularly in the private sector section of our economy, which we are primarily talking about private sector workers here, not public sector, and also workers that are covered under the NLRA. So we're gonna look at that. I got some statistics that I'm going to hand out for you. You can use them as you will. You can take them with you. There's nothing secret about it. It's all public record. But we need to look at those before we can then move on to what lessons we might draw from all of that. First quarter 1937, General Motors recognizes the UAW, what was to become the UAW, under a very limited agreement as the union in the a union in the General Motors plant. Shortly after that, GE recognized the UE with a similar, very limited agreement. The precipitating factor was the Flint sit-down strike, right? Which a group of workers grabbed a key piece of the Flint General Motors works and refused to give it back. But that's the story we love to tell. We like to talk about Flint, and man, you ask people, everybody was there. Oh yeah, I sat down. That was me. It was that. It's like 150 people sat down, and the other 35,000 people went home. Right? So we don't want to get carried away with how heroic the working class is. You've met the working class. Mets are Mets, right? So what we're interested in is what preceded that. How did that happen? We'll talk a little bit. We'll make a little story probably about the Flint sit-down strike. But what we want to know is how did this recognition, what we're calling a sweeping recognition, come about? And I'm going to talk a little bit about my old union, the UE. I don't know the details as much about the UAW on that first agreement, but here was the agreement. General Electric agreed to recognize the UE as a bargaining agent for grievances in the locations where the UE existed for its members only. So for 6 months. And this first agreement was a nickel raise, a seniority system, because favoritism, remember we're in the middle of the Depression, so that favoritism of who gets a job and who doesn't, who's going to starve and who's going to eat, becomes a very important factor. So the seniority system to do away with favoritism, and a grievance procedure with elected stewards to enforce it. That was the entire agreement. The agreement recognized the union where it existed in its kernel, in other words, in the cadres. So the union didn't have majorities anywhere, but it had cadre all through the General Electric empire, and also in Westinghouse, and in Whirlpool, and in the appliance makers, and in RCA radio, right, and Philco radio. So that what had happened in the 10 or so years prior to 1937 was the UE built a network of small groups in all the key manufacturing locations. And when a breakthrough came, which happened to be the UAW sit-down at Flint, they were in a position then to compete for majority support. That's probably the first lesson we want to draw from this, is you don't go from 0 to 60. You've got to lay a groundwork, and that groundwork has to exist in the key places. There's nothing against other workers that may not work in a key place, but you have to, we're talking about power here. So you have to grab onto the places that are meaningful, like at the sit-down strike. They didn't capture just anything in Flint. They captured the tool-making facility, knowing full well that if you take that and don't give it back, the entire General Motors production line grinds to a halt. Right? It's not all that complicated when you think about it. Hard to do, but not complicated to grasp what was going on. Sit-down strikes preceded the Flint sit-down strike. Usually it was used to solve grievances. The rubber workers in particular, and the farm equipment workers used to solve many grievances without having a union by sitting down. The first time that people sat down to try to win union recognition happened to be the UE at RCA. And they sat down and they made a mistake. It was a brand new young leadership, 21, 22 years old. And they became convinced that they could go back, they could give up what they had captured and go out on a more traditional strike under some assurances from the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers fucked them. Gee, really? And they lost the strike. The guys in Flint took that to heart. So the trick on a sit-down strike is not necessarily to sit down. It's to don't give it back. All right. So that this was networks through all of basic manufacturing that was experimenting, mostly failing. Right? Experimenting with strikes, experimenting with sit-downs, experimenting on how to build a union. But the key thing was they were in a network, one to the other to the other. And so what was going on in Westinghouse, you could use in General Electric. What was going on in Sylvania, you could use in Westinghouse. That's the infrastructure we don't have. That's the infrastructure that we need to build. If we think that we're going to organize the South one place at a time, it will take about 1.5 millennium. I figured it out once. I did the arithmetic. I don't think any of us are going to live long enough to see that happy day. So we have to somehow replicate what we're calling the sweep recognition. And we're going to update that a little bit from sweep recognition, which was how the CIO was organized, to sweep elections, which is what we face today. So let me just finish on Flint, because it is an interesting story. There were 7 men that engineered the sit-down. One of them was the organizer, came from the Communist Party. His name was Windermere Mortimer. Windermere Mortimer. He wrote a book called Organized, a wonderful book. You won't find it anywhere, but it's you might find it on the internet. So around these 6 guys,
in the library.
Maybe.
Why?
Yeah.
Why can I get that one?
Well, it's just out of print. It's been so long ago. He wrote it right after the Flint one of the problems we have, you know, when you try to figure out how social movements actually operate, is we're not taught any of this. So we have to do it ourselves, right? We got to figure it out and do it ourselves, listen to the old timers, you know. Yeah. Oh, all right. Oh, yeah, here comes trouble. Let's find a seat somewhere over here. All right. So surrounding these 6 men at Flint was what they call key men, and there's about 45, 50 key men. And surrounding them is what we nowadays would call the militant minority, a couple thousand people that you could call on to be supportive. But that pretty much is what a cadre, surrounded by what we call a committed core, surrounded by the militant minority. It was always based on very small numbers of very dedicated people that were committed to the idea that industrial unionism meant bringing democracy into the workplace. And so that we want to the degree that we find it possible, and one of the reasons we're having this conference is to try to magnify our strength here, we need to be forming these cadres and tie them together in networks. And these networks aren't to persuade somebody to vote yes on some given day. The network is devoted to taking actions, increasing people's consciousness, getting people used to the idea of engaging in public collective action. So back then, folks would go to unemployment councils, they would, you know, march for unemployment relief, they would do all kinds of stuff, and which we have to duplicate with the non-union Southern worker as well. So that's pretty much, in a nutshell, what happened in 37. So I want to talk about something that didn't happen in 37. There was no labor board then. There was no election machinery. So people fundamentally organized directly. We're going to organize the bargain. If we can't get a bargain, we're going to strike. Not a bad approach. I know more civilized country, you wouldn't have to do that, but that's how it was done then. But now, by the introduction of the labor board election, that puts a different glimmer on what we're talking about. That has to be taken into account. The Taft-Hartley Act, which is the amendments to the NLRA, pretty much requires an election to be certified. And I spent 45 years twisting and turning trying to figure out how to avoid that. We haven't figured it out yet. We're going to have to deal with it. So where the old timers in the 30s got sweeping recognition, what we need to get is sweeping elections. And by that I mean we want to be organizing such that we can arrange for labor board elections in an industry or in a corporation to be held in the same time frame. Why is that important? Because if you win, the bargaining will take place together. Do you see what I'm saying? That we want to, by compressing the elections and having a sweep election that, let's say, involves 15 places, we will end up in bargaining with 15 places, which we can then coordinate to magnify our strength and actually start to make an impact in whatever industry we're trying to organize. So one of the problems that the law does is it fools with us. It makes the election the end result of the process. That's not true. People don't organize to have an election, they organize to have a contract. So that they organize, from the very, very beginning of forming the cadres, the end result is not we're going to win an election. The end result is we're going to negotiate a contract that's going to be kick-ass, that's going to make a difference in people's lives. So it's not going to be, we're going to have the strength to get not just any old contract, but a good contract. And we have to have the strength that if we can't get the good contract, we're going to have to go on strike. See, and the election makes us into a bunch of I was going to say pussies, but that's... So we want to go around and people say, oh, you don't have to strike, just vote yes. You're not going to get a union by doing that, right? It doesn't work that way. You have to start with the beginning of the idea that we're going to organize ourselves to a sufficient strength that we can influence the corporation to deal with us on managing sweep elections. And so that you want to start from the very beginning with where you want to end up. Here's our 3 key demands. This is why we're forming a cadre. Someday we're going to get those commands by going to the, going to the bargaining table. So we get fooled into seeing the election as the be all and end all, and then we start to act that way. That's a mistake. That's a mistake. And if you happen to get a yes vote at some time or another, you won't get a contract. I mean, you started out too weak need a basis. So the other thing that, of course, happens is the Taft-Hartley Act, in effect, outlawed solidarity. And it has a tendency to make us bargaining unit parochial. By that I mean the law says these are the set bargaining units, right? This is who you will represent if you can certify the union. And it makes you look only at that bargaining unit and not bring in mass picketing and caravans of workers and do all the things that it actually is required, to have a mass mobilization in support of bargaining and eventually striking. So we don't want to get carried away with the labor board, but we want to recognize that we have to put that into our strategy. So when we're talking about cadre in key workplaces tied together in networks that are devoted to taking collective action together, the third thing we have to add in is we have to manage the labor board election. And that leads to a whole set of different tactics, because now what we're talking about is not the plant manager. We don't give a shit about the plant manager. We got to be talking about the corporate guys. So our tactics have to be such that we have to get their attention. They have to see us as the threat that we hope to be. And those are the folks you need to be dealing with. So that this elevates the tactical approaches that we want to take, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'm gonna give you some labor board results, and we're gonna talk about that for 15 minutes, and then I'm gonna pass out to you some tactical questions, and we'll talk about that for a little while, and then we want to have a lot of time to discuss this sort of stuff, because often it does change your thinking somewhat. And then we're going to get back together in the main room at 12:15 so we can march out here and scare the shit out of Trump by marching around this parking lot. Which I'm sure will be, All right, wait a minute now. Frank, can you help me with this?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Just pass it out.
One apiece. It's a bargain today. We're yeah. How many of you guys went to the workshop about Operation Dixie? Nobody? Well, the shorthand thing about Operation Dixie, that was the attempt to organize the South in 1946-47, is that it didn't work, which we know, we wouldn't be here. But it's a textbook case. The only thing of interest really about Operation Dixie is if you take the time to read a couple of things. We have something on our SWA website about it. It's a textbook case of how not to do it. So the Taft-Hartley Act had been passed, so the people who was running the CIO at that point, which were the right wing of the CIO, because we were in the middle now at the beginning of the red baiting days, where my old union and other unions were with being isolated in the CIO. What you need, hon?
So sorry. We're sitting out there and I was trying to get the handouts
Oh,
too.
Frank won't give it to you, I don't think. So the decision on the Operation Dixie is they were going to abide by the law, no mass mobilizations, no challenging of the Jim Crow Act, Jim Crow rules, no political action, just simply rely one plant at a time on labor board elections. Didn't work. It's all you need to know about Operation Dixie, really. Didn't work. So that you can draw the conclusion that approach is not the way to do widespread, meaningful organizing. There's a time now and again when you might want to have a labor board election, but you're going to have to do it under the right circumstances. So if you take a look at this, I don't know, has everybody got one yet?
No.
All right.
Hold on a second. I'm taking a picture and I'll pass it on.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
So if you take a look at this and you see right on the top, you've got the column headings, year, employer, location, eligible voters, yes vote, and then on the back side of your copy, percentage yes of the BU. The BU is the bargaining unit. And we divided this into two. Elections that were held in a corporation happened to be all Amazon that had no collective bargaining base at all. Right? So there's no union background, there's no union knowledge necessarily in such a place. The key statistic to know, which is on the back side of your sheet, is the percentage yes of the bargaining unit. Those are the people who actually voted for the union. Okay? Right. Kind of low. So, and that, of course, that's really the power equation that the company looks at. How much of a threat is this union? Now, we would say there's two problems here. One is, even if you win an election in one place in a non-union corporation, you're screwed. Right? Because the whole business of winning a union election is to negotiate a good contract, and your chances of doing that are just about zero. And to prove the point, unfortunately, you look at JFK 8, that's Staten Island. And you look over at their vote, which was 31.8%. Now, they won the election. They won the election. But you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure out. All I got to do is look at that figure. If I'm Amazon, I'm never going to negotiate a contract with them. I'm just going to let time destroy them. All right? So that's a spot not to get yourself in. You don't want to be there. All you're going to be is the poster child for failure. So we have to be conscious of this stuff. This isn't a criticism of the people who did it or anything else. This is just objective conditions. We have to be aware of this. Now, if you move over to corporations with collective bargaining base in the South, it doesn't get much better. It gets a little bit better. So you see Boeing. Now, you would think that the vote would be higher in a place like Boeing. It had the main plant in Boeing and over in Seattle was all union. But Boeing, Nissan, Mercedes, which just happened last year. And now, the thing that should strike out to you is why is Mission and why is Volkswagen different? They're the only two on the sheet that there's a majority vote. Now that also informs our thinking here. I don't know a lot about the Volkswagen thing. I do know that the UAW summoned up enough power, either with their German friends, or the UAW's always had a bargaining relationship with Volkswagen. Way back when Volkswagen built their first plant in Westmoreland, Pennsylvania, that they were able to affect the unfairness of the labor board election, so that the election was run under certain rules that were favorable or let's put them this way, the election was run under rules where the company couldn't just beat the shit out of people to vote no. That's crucial, that you have to manipulate the board procedures some. The rules are designed to be unfair. And if you haven't gone through it, let me tell you, when the boss brings you into the office and says, I know where your wife works, and I know who's got your mortgage, and I'm telling you, you're gonna lose this job if you vote for the union, you're gonna vote against the union, if you got any sense at all, right? I mean, that's just, and you have to have enough power to affect the conduct of the company during these, what we hope to be sweep elections. Now, the Mission Hospital, I do know something about in some detail. The brother back there was one of the organizers of the NNLC. Where's my brother Marty? Right here was a key guy in San Antonio, Texas, when we built the NNLC. Asheville was the last of the sweep elections. This was the 21st election of 20 hospitals, all of which that the union won. So the folks in Mission got on the tail end of the sweep. Now the election was run under the old Taft-Hartley rules, and they got the shit kicked out of them. But they went right into bargaining immediately with all the other 20 hospitals, and they had a short strike, and their contract reflected all the 20, what were now 21 hospitals. So that in effect, the Asheville hospital came in on the tail end of an organizing project that started way back in 2004. And we went through, Marty can tell you, Marty now works for the UAW. You know, we were trying to build cadre all through Texas, Florida, Missouri, Kansas, Arizona, Louisiana. We got driven out of North Carolina 3 times in an effort to set up a sweep election, which we ended up doing. So the first sweep election in the South was 15 hospitals. And then we added another 5 as time went on, and these guys in Asheville was the 6th, so the 21st to come in. So you can see right away that there are ingredients that make those 2 elections stand out. Now, I don't know, does anybody know from the UAW what the status of the bargaining at VW? Brother?
Yes. I'm Jeff. I'm with the Labor Council in Chattanooga. They are keeping the cards close to their chest. But, they say that the only issue holding them up is trying to get 100% of healthcare costs covered, and that's the issue on the table that's still contentious. But they have on the table a contract that would already, according to the rumor mill, it would already be a watershed contract for working this out. So if they can push for that last little bit, we're hopeful that it'll set a really high bar and increase the prospect of organizing across the sector.
Well, encourage them. Otherwise, the story doesn't quite hang together as well as I'd like it to.
It's also important, that was their 4th election. To win last year, like they had been exposed to this stuff from many elections past, and you had those cadre members who could say, look, they said the same shit last time, and things just got worse. When are we going to finally draw a line in the sand? So credit to those organizers who stuck with it for 16 years.
So, a couple things then we can draw from: cadre, network, collective action. See, we gotta remember, particularly as unions have gotten receded. We're at 6% now, under 6% of private sector workers. Most people no longer have a first-hand experience of solidarity. It's almost gone in the workforce, which means for us you have to recreate the trust and the confidence in collective action. And you have to recreate the assurance that if you have an injury and you put out your hand, that the man next to you will take your hand, and he'll put out his hand, and the woman next to him will take his, right? that doesn't just have, you can't just talk somebody into solidarity. You have to do it, right? And by doing it, you learn it. And by learning it, you become more confident. That's where the network comes in. The network is your way to take action on issues of the day. Like what we're going to do today, you know, magnified 100 times. You bring non-union workers to collective events, and then talk about it afterwards. Why did we go to that thing? What's the issue? What'd you think about the folks that were there? Right? You know, that sort of business has to go on in some cases for years before you build up enough ability to really bargain and if necessary, strike. So I'm going to pass out one more thing, and then we're going to open up the floor. So like I was saying, that to kind of complete the picture so that you have the whole, in capsule form, you have the thinking here, is if we're after big game, like we want the corporation, not the plant manager, then the tactics have to follow. There's no sense in having a strategy that says we're going to move the corporation towards dealing with us on sweep elections, and then have tactics that put you down here and you're just dealing with, you know, some problem that somebody has over overtime. I'm not making light of overtime problems, but that ain't gonna move the corporation. So your tactics got to move you up the feeding chain to where the corporation lives. You know, there's nobody who is less consequential than a plant manager. Right? The workers below him hate him. Right? The corporate guys doesn't give a shit about him. Right? He's a buffer between the corporation and the workforce. And so there's a mistake made sometimes where we focus so much on the shop issues, and the shop issues obviously play a part in organizing. But we become obsessed with, let's me and you, we'll go in and try to straighten out somebody's problem. That doesn't lead you to where we need to go here. When you have a union, you can do that. Ask the president, right? I mean, I bet you can't walk down the street before somebody comes up to you and says, I have a grievance about blah, 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 blah. Right? Yeah, it used to be that way in the UE towns too. You couldn't go to the goddamn mall. How are we doing in negotiation? I said, leave me alone. But that's the power of the union. That's why you have a union, right? Is they got somebody to talk to about the issues of the day. When you don't have a union and you're trying to influence the corporation, you don't want to get bogged down with every little minutia that goes on in the plant. The grievances of the working class are endless. There'll always be grievances. Don't worry about that. One of the highest job securities that you can have is a union official. Right? It never ends. So let's look at, everybody got this strategic organizing sweep elections? All right, so we got to keep in mind here, the object of our cadre and our network is to bring to bear some power at the corporate level that feels compelled, for whatever reason, to deal with the union, which is they perceive rightfully as a threat to them. So we want to get up to where they live. And that means certain things that we want to elevate. So when people come, for example, and have an individual problem, we want to turn that problem into a group problem. And then we want to have our cadre that's in the industry. Let's say we're dealing with the EV, you know, the electric vehicles, because we have been dealing with that. We want to generalize that problem into a structural problem. So, you have a problem with hours of work? Well, let's find out, you work for Honda, let's find out what they do with Toyota. Let's find out what's going on over here at Hyundai. In other words, we want to see, we're getting to the structural problem. You feel like you need a raise? Yeah, you do need a raise, but let's look at the wage schedule that this corporation has set up. And in fact, this is an example. We've been doing this. We have a project, you know, with the EV, people going into the EV plants. And so we're starting to keep track. So for example, an assembler in Mobus, which is outside of Savannah, starts at $21.33. The job rate pays $28.51. The company says you can go from the start rate to the job rate in 3 years. 1, 2, 3. 3 years. Now, one thing is nice about that schedule is they say it's going to be automatic. We'll see if that's true. But see, we're taking an individual wage issue and turning it into a structural issue. Not just in Mobus, but we want to find BMW, the machine operator starts at 20. At Hyundai, starts at $22.50. At Toyota in the Triad, she starts at 24. We want to recreate the wage structures and turn a wage issue into a structural issue. So what kind of wage structure are they imposing on the people in the South? That's what we really want to know, see? So the trick here is, again, elevating our vision here about what we're trying to do. And there's all kinds of issues. You look at this and you say, I find it hard to believe that an entry-level assembly job takes 3 years to learn. Right? How can that possibly be? You guys have automatic progression, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you start and you get a raise and you get a raise and a raise. Depending on the complexity of the job, you're now at the job rate, you're at the top rate, right? So, okay, so maybe they have automatic progression at Mobus, but 3 years to learn the entry-level job, that can't be. That's all extra gravy, see, that the company is getting. Because you probably in a matter of months, you can master that job. And so you're going to do it now for the next 2.5 years at the rate, right, at the lower rate, right? And that's what's going on. See, if we want to become skilled at taking individual issues and turning them into structural issues. So we're working on this. As a matter of fact, we're going to have a little caucus at the end of lunch today and start to fill out. We want to fill out this wage thing. What are they paying you over here? What are they paying you over there? How do you get from the top of to the bottom? How long is the progression? Right? That's where the grievances lie. See, they manifest themselves in the plant. Well, I'm not making enough money. So you're telling me. I'm with you. But that isn't your problem, that you're going to go in by yourself and get a nickel raise. The problem is in the wage structure. So that's a kind of example on tactics that we want to be talking about. You want to spread from an individual to the unit to the plant-wide to the other plants in the industry, and pretty soon you start to craft a program, right? The union's program to raise wages in the South. It's not 15 cents an hour or 20 cents an hour. It's the wage structure. We're going to do this and this and this to the wage structure. Now this then turns what started as an individual grievance into a structural fight with the industry. We want to have a structural fight with a corporation. That's what we're looking to do. And perhaps later on when we have a discussion, Monty will tell you, we used to do all kinds of shit to try to engage the hospital corporations into, we would kind of egg them on, right? Because we needed the conflict with them. So that's kind of the thinking that you want to bring to this. You want to get the issue out of the factory. To the degree that you can do it, you want to turn the issue into a public issue, into a political issue if you can, right? I'm always amazed, you notice how quiet the Southern Republican governors are about Trump's cutback of, right? Well, remember when Biden announced, they were all out there, man. They said, oh yeah, there are going to be some jobs for us. Now they're not saying shit, right? Call them out. See, nothing stops us from calling them out. Say, we're the EV organizing committee of the South. And you're a bunch of hypocrites. Now who's going to say we're not? We say, yes, we are. Right? We can be anything we want to be. We got to be more ambitious in our approach here, right? We want to engage the corporations. So that's gives a whole different set of tactics. And just one final example. If I go to work every day and I produce a product and I do it in a safe and productive manner, at the end of my week, I get a paycheck. That's a transaction. That's just the way it is, right? So I produce for you, you give me money. It's like buying a quart of milk at the supermarket. It's just a transaction. If you want me to invest 25 or 30 years of my life, how long you been in the plant, brother? How long?
22 years.
23?
Yeah.
If you want me to invest 23 years of my life, when I end my tenure at that plant, I want a return on my investment. Just like you had a contract with Duke Power. And what I want are the big ticket items. I want a pension, and I want health insurance for me and my family until I get to Medicare age, and maybe even some wraparound insurance after that. That's an important thing, because people have been conditioned now. I remember, it's like we talk about a union town. My hometown was organized by the UE, cutting tool factories, the machine tools that cut metal. And my uncle was an accountant, he was a lower level white collar worker, didn't belong to the union. But we had organized a kind of along those strategic organizing. We had a cutting tool conference. All the cutting tool locals in the UE were in one conference. So we could do pattern bargaining, right? Just what we're talking about here today. And so when I go home for holidays, my hometown, my uncle's always there, and he said, how are we making out on early retirement? First of all, because he was the most well-informed non-UE member in the country, right? And I said, you ought to be paying dues, man. So he questioned me, how's the early retirement coming along, right? Do we have it in Morse Twistville yet? Do we have it in Greenfield Tap and Die? How about Cleveland Twist? Anybody getting it? So finally the day came that we actually were winning it in all the cutting tool plants. And he was Uncle Joe, so he asked me once, I said, yes, we just got it at Greenfield Tap and Die. We would expect the next set of bargaining at Union Twist Drill, that we'll get full retirement at 60 and insurance coverage, until you get Medicare age, and surviving spouse insurance coverage, because usually somebody's gonna precede somebody else in death. So we no sooner get that, then he and my aunt sell their house in my hometown, move to Cape Cod, and spend the rest of their lives clamming and fishing. This is what a union used to mean to people, right? We got to get back to at least understanding that that's what's at stake here. So when you go to somebody and say, do you have a pension? You go to work in the auto industry, do you have a pension? No, they're going to give us some stock. Well, fuck the stock. That's not our game. We want a guaranteed pension, right? That every month pays a guaranteed amount of money, no matter what the stock market is doing. So this is all tied into the question of strategic organizing and how to handle grievances. The last point I want to make, I think you have it on your sheet, is there is a place, after saying all this, there is a place for a single unit board election, right? Could be that you have much of the corporation organized already and there's one or two outliers that you're trying to organize. I mean, there are some reasons that you could have not a sweep election, but just a one plant election. But let me tell you, we've been running labor board elections since the Taft-Hartley was passed in 1947. And that's, I don't know, what's that, 75 years or so? And I think it's on your sheet. There's three things that will allow you to win an election. And the reason I'm raising this with you guys, I know you're not going to go out and be running elections, but you will come in contact with unions that are. And you want to be in a careful way and in a helpful way, understanding what it takes to actually win one labor board election. And it takes these three things together. You have to have a sign-up of at least 60%, maybe a little bit higher if you can get it, but it's got to be 60%, and it's got to be an informed sign-up. I don't mean like, I'll sign a card to get an election. We don't want that shit. It's got to be, I'll join the union to bargain on these three top issues, and I'm prepared to back that up. That's the kind of joining that you want to have. You gotta have an active organizing committee that's roughly one organizing committee member for every 10 workers. And that's gonna be an experienced organizing committee. In other words, they have experience in leading fights, or experience in going out into public and having public collective action. So you have to have those two things. And before you have the vote, you gotta demonstrate majority support. It could be getting everybody out on a rally. It could be you put out a multi-page flyer with everybody's picture. We're voting yes on Tuesday for this, this, and this. This is why we're voting for the union. And people will count it. You wait and see if they don't. They'll take that flyer and they'll count up all the pictures. And it better come up to a majority, right? So you've got to have those three things. If you don't have those three things, pull the goddamn election petition. We don't need to have lost elections in the South. We already got enough fucking trouble, right? We don't have to have the poster child of how not to do it. And so understanding the board election and how it fits in with strategic organizing and bargaining, we think is worth your consideration. And we try to build these things as best as we can, and we would certainly enjoy having other people to help us.